He was the king of New York's underworld, a man who buried his heart along with his wife and son 4 years ago. She was just the invisible maid, scrubbing his floors, too poor to afford a winter coat. Salvatore Moretti didn't notice people. He broke them. But the night he caught his trembling maid stealing from his private study, he didn't fire her. He followed her. He expected to find a thief, a junkie, or a rat selling his secrets. Instead, he kicked down the door of a crumbling apartment and saw something that froze the blood in his veins and forced a gun to drop from his hand. What she was hiding wasn't a crime. It was a miracle that would burn his empire to the ground. The rain in Staten Island didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Salvatore Moretti stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, swirling a glass of amber whiskey that cost more than most people earned in a year. The room was dark, lit only by the sporadic flashes of lightning that illuminated the heavy oak furniture and the shelves lined with unread books. At 42, Salvatore was a man carved from granite and grief. To the papers, he was a logistics consultant. To the streets, he was the capo who had solidified control over the eastern seaboard after the 22 Port Authority War. But in this house, he was a ghost haunting his own life. It had been 4 years since the car bomb, 4 years since Isabella and their infant son Leo had been turned to ash on the I-95. The police called it a rival hit. Salvatore called it the day he died, even if his body kept breathing. A faint creak from the hallway broke his trance. Salvatore didn't turn. His instincts, sharpened by decades of looking over his shoulder, told him exactly where the intruder was. He watched the reflection in the dark window glass. It was the maid, the new one. He struggled to remember her name. Claire. She was small, frail, with hair the color of wet sand, usually pulled back in a severe fraying bun. She had been working at the Moretti estate for 3 months, hired by his housekeeper, Mrs. Galloway. Salvatore barely acknowledged her existence. She was just a blur of grey uniform that smelled faintly of cheap bleach and fear. Usually the staff knew better than to enter the West Wing after sunset. This was his sanctuary, his mausoleum. Through the reflection he watched her. She wasn't cleaning. She was creeping toward the large mahogany desk. Her hands were shaking violently. Salvatore set his glass down. The sound was soft, a mere click of crystal against wood. But Clara jumped as if he'd fired a pistol. She spun around, clutching something to her chest. I didn't know you were in here, sir," she stammered. Her voice was thin, brittle. Her eyes were wide, terrified saucers in a pale, gaunt face. She looked malnourished, he noted, with a detached coldness. Her uniform hung off her collarbones. "The West Wing is off limits, Clara," Salvatore said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. He turned slowly to face her. Mrs. Galloway made that clear. She did, sir. I'm sorry. She took a step back, her knuckles white as she gripped the fabric of her apron. "What do you have in your hand?" Clara froze. "Nothing. Just dust. A rag." Salvatore walked toward her. He didn't rush. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther closing in on a wounded deer. He stopped 2 feet from her. He could smell the rain on her clothes mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline. "Open your hand. Please, Mr. Moretti, I need this job. Please." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over instantly. "I won't ask twice." Trembling Clara slowly uncurled her fingers. Resting in her palm was not jewelry, nor cash, nor a silver spoon. It was a small, battered toy car, a red die-cast Ferrari chipped at the bumper. Salvatore's breath hitched. The air left the room. That car. It had been Leo's. It was the last thing he had bought his son. He kept it on the shelf behind the desk next to the urns. A sacred relic. "You're stealing from my dead son." Salvatore's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more violence than a scream. Clara shook her head frantically. "No. No, sir. I wasn't stealing it to sell. I swear I needed to borrow it. Just for tonight. I was going to bring it back before you woke up. Please, borrow it." Salvatore snatched the toy from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. Her skin was ice cold. "You think this is a library? Get out. Mr. Moretti. Get out." He roared the thunder outside, punctuating his rage. "You're fired. If I see you on this property in 10 minutes, I'll have the dogs chase you off." Clara didn't argue. She sobbed a wretched, broken sound and fled the room. Salvatore stood there, gripping the small metal car until the edges dug into his palm. He felt the familiar surge of darkness, the urge to hurt something. How dare she? How dare she touch the memory of his boy? He walked back to the window. He watched as the heavy iron gates at the end of the driveway opened. A small, solitary figure hurried out into the deluge. No umbrella, no coat. Just that thin grey uniform. She looked pathetic, but something nagged at him. I needed to borrow it. Who steals a toy car to borrow it? A thief takes watches. Cufflinks, cash. A junkie takes silverware. A spy takes documents. And why did she look so familiar? Not her face, but her eyes. There was a desperation there that didn't fit a simple petty theft. It was the desperation of a mother. Salvatore looked at the toy car. Then he looked at the storm raging outside. His instincts, the ones that had kept him alive, while other bosses rotted in graves or cells, were screaming. Something is wrong. He grabbed his phone and dialed his driver, but then hung up. No. This needed to be handled personally. He grabbed his trench coat and his keys to the black Maserati. He didn't know why, but he couldn't let her just walk away. He had to know where she was going. He had to know why a starving woman would risk her life for a chipped red toy. He was going to follow her. The Maserati Gran Turismo was a shark in the water, slipping silently through the rain-slicked streets of Staten Island. Salvatore kept his headlights off, relying on the street lamps and his knowledge of the roads. He spotted her 3 blocks from the estate, trudging toward the bus stop. She was soaked through her shoulders, hunched against the biting wind. He watched from a distance as she boarded the S-74 bus. He followed. The drive took them away from the manicured lawns of Todd Hill, down through the commercial districts, and finally toward the ferry. But she didn't take the ferry. She transferred to another bus, heading deep into the forgotten pockets of the borough, an area where the streetlights flickered and the buildings leaned against each other like drunks. This was the Hollows, territory run by the low-level street gangs, the Scorpions. Salvatore technically owned this turf, but he let the rats scramble for crumbs here. It was a place of despair. Clara got off at a corner, dominated by a boarded-up bodega and a pile of uncollected trash bags. Salvatore parked the Maserati 2 blocks away, tucked behind a dumpster to hide its sleek silhouette. He checked the Sig Sauer P226 holstered under his arm. He stepped out into the rain. He trailed her on foot, keeping to the shadows. She walked with a limp now, exhaustion setting in. She turned into an alleyway between two tenement buildings that looked like they should have been condemned in the 80s. The fire escapes were rusted skeletons clinging to the brick. She stopped at a heavy steel door, fumbling for keys. Salvatore waited until she was inside, then counted to 10. He moved to the door. It was locked, but the frame was rotted. He didn't need to pick it. He just needed leverage. But he paused. He could hear voices through the thin walls of the ground-floor apartment. He moved to the window. The glass was covered in grime and taped over with cardboard, but there was a small gap. He peered inside. It was a studio apartment, if you could call it that. A mattress on the floor, a hot plate, a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Damp spots bloomed on the wallpaper like bruising. Clara was there. She was stripping off her wet uniform, shivering violently. She pulled on a ratty, oversized sweater. Then she moved toward the corner of the room where a makeshift blanket fort was set up. "Mama!" The voice was tiny, weak. Salvatore pressed his ear against the cold glass. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Clara cooed, her voice transforming from the terrified Maid to something warm and protective. She crawled into the blanket fort. "Did you get it?" the boy asked. "Did you get the vroom vroom?" Salvatore's heart hammered against his ribs. The toy. The boy wanted the toy. I'm sorry, sweetie," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "The bad man. The boss, he caught me. I couldn't bring it." "It's okay, Mama," the boy said. Then he coughed. It was a wet, rattling cough that sounded like death rattling a cage. "I don't need the car. I just need you." "Oh, God," Clara sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't give you anything." Salvatore pulled back from the window. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, a mixture of pity and confusion. So she was a single mother with a sick kid. Sad, yes. But not a mystery. She wanted the toy to comfort a dying child. He should leave. He should leave an envelope of cash under the door and walk away. That would be the mercy of a boss. He turned to go. "Tell me the story again, Mama." The boy's voice drifted through the glass. "The story about Papa." Salvatore froze. "Okay, baby, lie down." Clara's voice was steady now. "Once upon a time there was a king, a powerful king who lived in a big castle." Salvatore frowned. "Was he a bad king?" the boy asked. "No, he was a good king. He was brave and he protected everyone. But he was sad because he lost his queen. And me. He thinks he lost you too, my little prince. But he didn't, because I saved you. I pulled you from the fire." Salvatore felt the world tilt on its axis. He grabbed the brick ledge of the window to steady himself, pulled from the fire. "Does he know I'm here?" the boy asked. "No, if he knew the bad men, the ones who made the fire, would come back. We have to hide. We have to be quiet mice." "I want to see him," the boy whined. "I have his eyes. You said I have his eyes." "You do. One blue, one green, just like him." Salvatore stopped breathing. Heterochromia. It was a genetic trait in the Moretti bloodline. Salvatore had it, one eye icy blue, the other hazel green. Leo had been born with it. It was rare, impossible to fake. The room spun. The rain felt like needles. Isabella. The car, the explosion, the closed casket funeral, because there was nothing left to identify. The police report said the infant was incinerated. I pulled you from the fire. Salvatore didn't think. He didn't plan. The cold, calculating Mafia Don vanished, replaced by a father possessed by a ghost. He moved to the door. He didn't bother with the lock this time. He raised his boot and kicked it. Crash! The wood splintered. The door flew open, banging against the wall. Clara screamed. She scrambled out of the blanket fort, grabbing a kitchen knife from the hot plate, placing herself between the intruder and the corner. "Stay back! I'll kill you, I swear I'll—" She stopped. She saw the silhouette in the doorway, framed by the lightning and the rain. The trench coat, the broad shoulders. Salvatore stepped into the light of the single bulb. He was soaking wet, his face a mask of terrifying intensity. "Mr. Moretti," Clara whispered, the knife clattering to the floor from her shaking hands. Salvatore didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the pile of blankets in the corner. A small head poked out. The boy was pale thin, his cheeks flushed with fever. He had dark, curly hair, just like Isabella. And then the boy looked up. Salvatore felt his knees hit the dirty linoleum floor. He didn't remember falling. The boy stared at him with wide, fearful eyes. One eye was icy blue. The other was hazel green. "Leo." Salvatore whispered the name, tearing out of his throat like a jagged stone. The boy tilted his head. He looked at Clara, then back at the giant man on his knees. "Mama," the boy whispered. "Is that the king?" The silence in the cramped, mildew-scented room was louder than the storm raging over Staten Island. Salvatore Moretti. The man who could silence a room of shouting captains with a single glance was paralyzed. He stared at the small boy, Leo, whose mismatched eyes blinked back at him with innocent confusion. Salvatore reached out a trembling hand. His fingers, usually steady on the trigger of a gun, hovered over the boy's face, afraid that if he made contact, the hallucination would shatter. "Leo," he choked out again. The boy flinched, burying his face into the dirty pillow. "Mama!" Clara scrambled forward, throwing herself between Salvatore and the mattress. She didn't have the knife anymore, but she had her hands up. Her fingers curled into claws. She looked like a cornered feral cat. "Don't touch him," she hissed. Her voice was raw. "You don't get to touch him." Salvatore's eyes snapped from the boy to the woman. The shock began to recede, replaced by a volcanic surge of confusion and rage. He grabbed Clara's wrists, pinning them easily with one hand. 4 years. Salvatore growled, his face inches from hers. "I buried an empty casket. I buried a piece of charcoal the police told me was my son. I mourned him every single day. And you have had him in this rat hole. I saved him," Clara screamed, struggling against his grip. "I saved him from you. From your world. You stole my son," Salvatore roared. "I kept him, Alem," Clara shouted back, her voice breaking. "That day on the highway I was there, Salvatore. I was in the car behind the convoy. I was the nanny for the Falcone family, remember? We were 2 cars back." Salvatore froze. He remembered. The Falcone car had been part of the entourage. "The explosion." Clara spoke faster now, desperate to make him understand, as tears streamed down her face. "It threw Isabella's car off the road down the embankment. I saw it. I ran down. The fire hadn't reached the back seat yet. I pulled Leo out through the broken window. He was unconscious, bleeding, but alive." "Why didn't you bring him to me?" Salvatore shook her, his grip tightening. "I was right there. I was in the lead car. Because I saw them." Clara's eyes were wild. "I was carrying him up the hill, hidden in the tall grass. I saw men in black tactical gear pull up before the police did. They didn't help, Salvatore. They walked to the burning wreck of your wife's car. and they shot into it. They were making sure no one survived. One of them got on a radio and said, "The air is gone. The job is done." Salvatore released her wrists as if they were red-hot iron. He stumbled back. "They were wearing your colors," Clara whispered, rubbing her bruised wrists. "They had the Moretti crest on their vests. I thought you ordered it. I thought you wanted your family dead." The room spun. Salvatore leaned against the peeling wallpaper, fighting the urge to vomit. His men. His colors. If Clara had brought Leo out of the grass that day, if she had handed him to the men securing the perimeter, Leo would have been executed on the spot. "I ran," Clara sobbed. "I took him. I changed my name. I dyed my hair. I moved every 6 months. I used every penny I had to buy him medicine to keep him hidden. I came to work for you 3 months ago, because I had no choice. We were starving. I thought if I could just work in the house, I could steal enough to get us out of the state. I didn't know you were still grieving. I thought you were the monster who ordered the hit." Salvatore looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the hollow cheeks, the dark circles, the red, chapped hands. He saw a woman who had sacrificed her entire life, her youth, and her safety to protect a child that wasn't hers. She had walked into the lion's den, his house, just to put food in Leo's stomach. He looked back at Leo. The boy was watching him with those mismatched eyes, Isabella's eyes. "Is he sick?" Salvatore asked, his voice hollow. "The apartment is damp," Clara said, wiping her face. "He has asthma. It turned into bronchitis last week. I can't afford the antibiotics anymore. That's why I tried to take the toy car. I thought maybe I could sell it to a collector, just for the medicine." Salvatore felt a tear slide down his cheek. It was a hot, foreign sensation. He walked over to the bed. He knelt down. He didn't reach out this time. He just looked at his son. "Leo," he whispered, "I'm not the king from the story, but I am your papa." Leo looked at Clara. She nodded slowly, fresh tears falling. "It's okay, baby. It's him." Leo reached out a small, fever-hot hand and touched Salvatore's wet trench coat. "You're big," the boy rasped. "Yeah," Salvatore choked out. "I am." He stood up abruptly. The grief was gone. The shock was gone. In their place was a soul terrifying resolve. The king had returned. He stripped off his heavy trench coat and wrapped it around Leo, bundling the boy up like a precious package. "We're leaving," Salvatore commanded. "Where?" Clara asked, panic rising again. "If we go out there." "We are going home," Salvatore said. He scooped Leo up into his arms. The boy was impossibly light, and if anyone tries to touch him or you, I will burn this entire city to ash. He looked at Clara. "Grab your things. Only what matters." Clara looked around the miserable room. She grabbed a worn photo of her own parents, a small bag of Leo's clothes, and the red toy Ferrari that Salvatore had dropped on the floor. "Let's go," Salvatore said. He kicked the broken door open and carried his son out into the rain, shielding him with his body. He didn't care about the mud. He didn't care about the storm. He had his life back in his arms. The drive back to Tot Hill was a blur of tension. Salvatore drove with one hand on the wheel, the other constantly reaching back to check on the bundle in the back seat. Clara sat in the back with Leo holding his head on her lap. The heater in the Maserati blasted, drying their soaked clothes. "He's burning up," Clara whispered, her hand on Leo's forehead. "I called ahead," Salvatore said, his eyes scanning the mirrors for tails. He had taken a convoluted route, doubling back 3 times to ensure they weren't being followed. "Dr. Alden is meeting us at the house. He's the best." "Can we trust him?" Clara asked. Her voice was hard, suspicious. She had spent 4 years trusting no one. "Alden delivered Leo," Salvatore said. "He pronounced him dead 4 years ago. He's going to have a heart attack tonight, but yes, I trust him with my life." When the iron gates of the Moretti estate rolled open, the storm had intensified. Thunder rattled the chassis of the car. Salvatore pulled right up to the front steps, ignoring the designated garage. He killed the engine and was out of the car before the interior lights faded. He opened the back door and lifted Leo out. The front door of the mansion opened. Mrs. Galloway, the elderly housekeeper, stood there in her nightgown, clutching a shawl. "Mr. Moretti." She squinted into the rain. "I heard the car. Is everything—" She stopped. She saw the maid, Clara, step out of the luxury car. And then she saw the bundle in Salvatore's arms. Salvatore didn't stop. He stormed past her into the grand foyer. "Get clean towels," he barked. "Get hot water, and tell Dr. Alden to come straight to the master suite, not the guest room, the master suite." "Sir, who is—" Mrs. Galloway started. Then she saw the boy's face as the trench coat slipped slightly. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lord, have mercy." "Move, Martha," Salvatore shouted. He carried Leo up the grand staircase, Clara trailing close behind him, leaving muddy footprints on the pristine marble. He brought them to the room that had been sealed for 4 years. The nursery. It was exactly as it had been left. The crib was dusty. The mobile of stars and moons hung still in the stagnant air. "No," Salvatore muttered. "Not here. It's too cold." He turned and kicked open the double doors to his own bedroom. He laid Leo gently in the center of the massive king-sized bed, on top of the silk duvet. Leo looked tiny in the expanse of the bed. He was shivering violently now, his breath coming in short, wheezing gasps. "Talk to me, Leo," Salvatore said, stripping the wet socks off the boy's feet. "Stay with me, buddy." "Thirsty," Leo mumbled. Clara was there instantly with a glass of water from the bathroom. She supported his head. "Slow sips, baby." Salvatore watched them. The dynamic was undeniable. She was his mother. Blood or not, she was his mother. The sound of heavy footsteps in the hall made Salvatore spin around, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun he had placed on the nightstand. A man in his 60s, carrying a leather medical bag, rushed in. Dr. Alden looked disheveled, wearing a raincoat over pajamas. "Salvatore, you sounded insane on the phone. What is—" Alden stopped. He looked at the bed. He looked at the boy. He looked at the eyes. The doctor's bag dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. "Impossible," Alden whispered. He walked forward like a man in a trance. "Isabella, it's Leo," Salvatore said, his voice cracking. "He's alive, but he's sick. Fix him, Alden. If you don't fix him, I swear to God." Alden snapped into professional mode instantly. He rushed to the bed, pulling out his stethoscope. "Clear the area. Let me work." Salvatore backed away, hitting the wall. He watched as Alden listened to the chest, checked the pulse, shone a light into the eyes. Clara stood on the other side of the bed, holding Leo's hand, whispering reassurances. "Severe pneumonia," Alden announced after a tense minute. "Dehydration, malnutrition. His oxygen levels are dangerously low." "Hospital?" Salvatore asked. "No," Clara and Alden said in unison. "We can't risk exposure," Alden said, pulling vials out of his bag. If he's been dead for 4 years, resurrection brings a lot of questions you don't want the authorities asking yet. I can set up an IV here. I have strong antibiotics, but he needs round-the-clock monitoring for the next 48 hours. It's going to be touch and go. Do it, Salvatore said. For the next 3 hours, the room was a flurry of activity. IV stands were set up. Oxygen tanks were wheeled in from the estate's private infirmary. Mrs. Galloway brought broth and blankets, weeping silently in the corner every time she looked at the boy. Finally, Leo fell into a fitful, drug-induced sleep. The wheezing had quieted to a steady rhythm. Dr. Alden stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. He's stable. The antibiotics are potent. He's a fighter, Sal, just like his father. Alden packed his bag. I'll stay in the guest room tonight. I want to check him every 2 hours. Thank you, Doc, Salvatore said. When the doctor and housekeeper left the room, fell quiet. Salvatore stood at the foot of the bed. Clara was sitting in a chair she had pulled up to the bedside, her head resting near Leo's hand. She was exhausted, her eyes drooping. You should sleep, Salvatore said. His voice was low, devoid of the anger from earlier. I'm not leaving him, Clara mumbled, without lifting her head. Salvatore walked around the bed. He stopped next to her. Clara. She looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, fearful. She still expected him to hurt her, to punish her. Salvatore slowly lowered himself to one knee, this time not to check on his son, but to look her in the eye. You said the men who shot the car were wearing my colors. Clara nodded, her breath hitching. Yes, black vests, the silver scorpion crest on the shoulder. The scorpion crest. It was the sigil of his elite guard, the Praetorian. Only 10 men wore that crest. They were his inner circle, his brothers. A chill colder than the grave settled into Salvatore's bones. Did you see a face? Salvatore asked. Any face. A scar, a tattoo, anything. Clara closed her eyes, thinking back to the nightmare she had relived every night for 4 years. I was far away, she whispered. But the one who gave the order, the one on the radio, he took off his mask to wipe the sweat off. He had silver hair, like white silver, and he smoked a thin cigar. Salvatore froze. Silver hair, thin cigars. Uncle Dante Moretti, his father's brother. The man who had raised Salvatore after his own father died. The man who sat at his right hand at every dinner. The man who had cried the loudest at Leo's funeral, holding Salvatore while he wept. Dante had ordered the hit. Dante had tried to kill his wife and son. Salvatore stood up. His face was a mask of stone. The joy of finding Leo was suddenly eclipsed by a darkness so profound it threatened to swallow the room. What is it? Clara asked, sensing the shift in the air. Do you know who it was? Salvatore didn't answer her. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling estate that suddenly felt like a prison. You are safe here, Salvatore said, his voice flat, deadly. No one enters this room but me, Dr. Alden, and Mrs. Galloway. Do you understand, Salvatore? He turned to look at her. His eyes were burning with a cold blue fire. My uncle killed my family, he said, and tomorrow I'm going to invite him to dinner. The morning sun hit the Tot Hill estate with a brilliance that felt offensive. Inside the master suite, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee. Salvatore hadn't slept. He sat in a leather wing-back chair, his gun on the side table, watching the chest of his 4-year-old son rise and fall. The IV drip was a steady rhythmic metronome counting down the seconds of a second chance he didn't deserve. Leo stirred. Salvatore tensed, leaning forward. The boy's eyelids fluttered open. The confusion was immediate, but as his mismatched eyes landed on Clara, who was asleep in the chair next to the bed, he settled. "Mama," he croaked. Clara woke instantly. It was a reflex born of years of sleeping with one eye open. She was checking his forehead before she was fully awake. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. How do you feel?" "Chest hurts," Leo whispered. "But soft bed?" "Yeah, it's a very soft bed." Clara smiled, brushing the curls off his forehead. She looked up and locked eyes with Salvatore. For a moment, the barrier of class and history vanished. They were just two parents terrified of losing the same child. "His fever broke," Clara said, her voice raspy with exhaustion. Salvatore let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 4 years. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked to the bed. He looked massive next to them, a dark shadow over their light. "Leo," Salvatore said gently, "do you know who I am?" Leo looked at the giant man. He looked at the scar above Salvatore's eyebrow, a mirror of the one Leo had from the accident. "The king," Leo said simply. Salvatore flinched. "No, I'm your dad. I'm Papa." Leo frowned, processing this. "Mama said Papa was lost. In the dark." "I was," Salvatore said, his voice thick with emotion. "But your mama found me." He looked at Clara. She was wearing the same dirty sweater she'd fled the apartment in. She looked frail, exhausted, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with glamour, and everything to do with strength. "You need clothes," Salvatore said, his tone shifting back to practical command. "And food, real food." He pressed a button on the intercom. "Mrs. Galloway, bring breakfast for 3 and call the stylist from Saks. Tell them it's an emergency." "A stylist?" Clara balked. "Salvatore, we don't need—" "Tonight is a funeral." Salvatore cut her off, his eyes hardening into flint. "And you need to look like the woman who brought the dead back to life. What are you talking about?" "Dante is coming to dinner," Salvatore said. "I invited him while you were sleeping. I told him I have a business opportunity that can't wait." Clara stood up, her maternal instinct flaring. "You're bringing him here to the house where Leo is?" "It's the only way," Salvatore said. "If I go to him, he'll be surrounded by his guards. If he comes here, he enters my world. He thinks I'm still the grieving widower. He thinks I'm weak." "He tried to kill a baby Salvatore," Clara hissed. "He's a monster." "I know." Salvatore stepped closer, towering over her. "And tonight, I'm going to introduce him to the devil." The transformation. 3 hours later, the master suite had been transformed into a bunker. 2 of Salvatore's most trusted men, Rocco and Luca, men who were barely out of high school when the initial attack happened and had no ties to Dante, stood guard outside the door with assault rifles. Inside, Clara stood in front of the full-length mirror. The stylist had come and gone, leaving behind a dress of midnight blue silk that hugged her slender frame and flared at the waist. Her hair, usually scraped back in a severe bun to hide its luster, was now washed and cascading down her back in waves of honey gold. She didn't look like the maid anymore. She looked like the lady of the manor. Salvatore walked in, buttoning the cuffs of his white dress shirt. He stopped dead. He had spent months ignoring her, looking right through her as she scrubbed his floors. Now, seeing her reflected in the glass, He felt a jolt of attraction so strong it nearly knocked him backward. "Does it fit?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. Clara turned. She looked uncomfortable, tugging at the silk. "I feel like an imposter. This isn't me, Salvatore. I'm a maid." "No." Salvatore walked over to her. He reached out and adjusted the strap of the dress, his fingers grazing her shoulder. "You are the woman who saved my son when my own blood tried to kill him. That makes you more royalty than anyone in this family." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a diamond necklace, a delicate teardrop pendant. "This was my mother's," Salvatore said. "Not Isabella's. My mother's. Wear it." "I can't." "Wear it," he commanded softly. "Tonight, you are not Clara the maid. You are Clara the witness." He fastened the clasp behind her neck. His hands lingered for a second too long on her warm skin. The air between them crackled with electricity, a mix of danger and intimacy. "Stay in the room with Leo until I call for you," Salvatore instructed, stepping back. "I have set up a camera feed in the dining room. You will watch on the monitor. When I give the signal, you come out." "What is the signal?" Salvatore checked his watch. It was 7:00 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the floor. "You'll know." The dining room of the Moretti estate was a cavernous hall of mahogany and gold designed to intimidate. A long table that could seat 30 was set for 2. Crystal wine glasses caught the light of the chandelier. The silverware was heavy enough to be a weapon. Salvatore stood at the head of the table, pouring a glass of 1985 Barolo. He was calm. It was the calm of the eye of a hurricane. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Mrs. Galloway, pale and trembling slightly, announced the guest. "Mr. Dante Moretti." Dante strolled in. He was 60, but moved with the vigor of a man half his age. He had the silver hair Clara had described slicked back impeccably. He wore a tuxedo, as if this were a gala, and not a dinner with his nephew. He smelled of expensive cologne and the thin cigars he favored. "Salva," Dante boomed, opening his arms. "My boy, you look intense. What is this emergency business?" Salvatore didn't smile. He didn't embrace his uncle. He gestured to the chair at his right hand. "Sit, uncle. Drink." Dante's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. He sat taking the wine glass. "Excellent vintage. You always did have your father's taste." "And you always had his ear," Salvatore said, taking his seat. The first course was served in silence. Dante ate with gusto, chattering about union disputes in the harbor, new shipments coming in from Naples, the rising cost of bribes. Salvatore said nothing. He watched Dante's mouth move. He watched the hands that had patted Leo's head at his christening. He watched the man who had ordered his family to burn. "You're quiet tonight, Salva," Dante said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Something on your mind?" "I was thinking about the past," Salvatore said. He swirled his wine. "About the accident." Dante sighed, his face arranging itself into a practiced mask of mourning. "A tragedy. Every day I pray for them. Isabella, little Leo." "Do you?" Salvatore asked. "What do you pray for Uncle Absolution?" The air in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dante put his glass down slowly. "I don't like your tone, nephew. I came here to help you." "I had a visitor yesterday," Salvatore continued, his voice low and dangerous. A thief. A maid who tried to steal something from my study. Hard to get good help these days. Dante scoffed, though his eyes darted to the door. Fire her. I did better than that. I followed her. Salvatore reached into his pocket. He pulled out the red die-cast Ferrari. He slid it across the polished table. The toy car spun and came to a stop right in front of Dante's plate. Dante stared at it. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Recognize it? Salvatore asked. It's a toy, Dante said, his voice tight. It's Leo's toy, the one I bought him the day before he died, the one that was in the car. You must have found it in the wreckage later, Dante stammered. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. No, Salvatore said. The car was incinerated. There was nothing left. Remember, that's what you told me. Closed casket, Salva. Don't look, Salva. Remember them as they were. Salvatore stood up. He loomed over the table. But this car isn't melted, Dante. It's just chipped. What are you saying? Dante stood up too, knocking his chair back. You've gone mad with grief. I'm leaving. Sit down, Salvatore roared. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Dante froze. The maid, Salvatore hissed. She didn't just have the car. She had a story about a man with silver hair and a thin cigar who watched a woman and a baby burn on the side of the I-95. Dante's face went grey. His hand moved instinctively toward his jacket pocket. Don't, Salvatore warned. Rocco and Luca have laser sights trained on your chest right now from the balcony. Dante slowly raised his hands. The mask of the loving uncle dissolved, revealing the snarling face of a cornered rat. You were weak, Salvatore, Dante spat. You were going soft, playing house with that woman. We were losing territory. I did what had to be done to save the family. You killed my wife, Salvatore said, walking around the table. She was a distraction. You killed my son. He was collateral damage, Dante screamed. I needed you focused. I needed the killer back, not the father. Well, Salvatore stopped inches from Dante. Congratulations, uncle. The killer is back. You can't kill me. Dante sneered, regaining some composure. I have the Capos loyal to me. If I don't walk out of here, there will be a civil war. You'll lose everything. I already lost everything, Salvatore said. Or so I thought. He looked at the camera mounted in the corner of the room. He nodded. The double doors at the far end of the dining room opened. Clara stepped out. She walked into the light, the blue silk shimmering. She held her head high, her eyes locking onto Dante with a hatred that could peel paint. Dante frowned. Who is this? The maid. Clara didn't speak. She stepped aside. Behind her, holding Mrs. Galloway's hand, walked a small boy in dinosaur pajamas. Dante's eyes bulged. He stumbled back, clutching his chest. He looked from the boy to Salvatore and back to the boy. No, Dante whispered. Ghost. Leo looked at the man with the silver hair. He tightened his grip on Mrs. Galloway's hand. That's the bad man, Leo said clearly. His voice cut through the silence. The man from the fire. Dante looked at Salvatore. Salva, please. We're blood. This, Salvatore pointed to Leo, is my blood. You are a cancer. Salvatore pulled his cig sour. He didn't hesitate. He didn't monologue. He fired 2 shots, one to the right shoulder, one to the left knee. Dante screamed and collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony. I'm not going to kill you, Salvatore said, standing over him. That would be too easy. I'm going to hand you over to the commission. I recorded everything. The confession. The attempt on a child's life. Salvatore crouched down. In our world, you can kill a man. You can even kill a wife. But a child, a son. Salvatore shook his head. The other families will peel you apart, slowly, piece by piece. You won't die today, Uncle. You'll die for weeks. Salvatore stood up and turned his back on the screaming man. He walked toward Clara and Leo. He fell to his knees and pulled them both into his arms. Clara buried her face in his neck, sobbing with relief. Leo hugged him tight. "It's over," Salvatore whispered into Clara's hair. "He can never hurt us again." But as the guards dragged Dante away, leaving a trail of blood on the marble, Salvatore looked at Clara. He realized that while the past was dead, the future was terrifyingly unwritten. He was a Mafia don. She was a maid. And they had a son who had just come back from the dead. The war was over. But the storm was just beginning. The silence that followed Dante's removal was heavy, but it wasn't empty. For the first time in 4 years, the silence in the Moretti estate didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a deep breath after a near drowning. Salvatore didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the king-sized bed in the master suite, watching Leo and Clara. They were asleep. Leo was curled into Clara's side, his small hand gripping the silk of her dress, which she hadn't bothered to change out of. Clara was asleep, sitting up, her head resting on the headboard, one arm thrown protectively over the boy. Salvatore watched them for hours, memorizing the rise and fall of their chests. He was a man who had conquered cities, negotiated wars, and amassed a fortune. But he had never felt a power like this. This was possession in its rawest form. They were his. And he would tear the world apart before he let anyone touch them again. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and gold, Clara stirred. She blinked disoriented before her eyes landed on Salvatore. She sat up straight, checking Leo instantly. "He's fine," Salvatore said softly. "His fever is gone. He's just dreaming." Clara rubbed her face, the reality of the previous night crashing down on her. The gunshots, the blood, the confession. "What happens now?" she whispered. Her voice trembled. Do I go back to the servants' quarters? Do I pack my bags?" Salvatore stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the grounds where his men were patrolling double the guard, triple the security. "You really think I would let you leave?" he asked without turning. "I don't belong here, Salvatore. I'm a maid. I grew up in a trailer park. I don't know how to be, whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at the opulence around her. "And your world, it's dangerous. I saw that last night." Salvatore turned. He walked back to the bed, sitting down so he was eye level with her. "You walked into a burning car to save a child that wasn't yours," he said intensely. "You lived in poverty, starved yourself, and hid from a Mafia hit squad for 4 years to keep him alive. You walked into the lion's den, my house, to steal for him. You stood between me and him with a kitchen knife." He reached out, taking her rough, work-worn hand in his. He traced the calluses on her palm with his thumb. "You have more courage in this one finger than every captain in my organization combined. You don't belong in the servants' quarters, Clara. You belong at the head of the table." Clara looked down at their joined hands. "But I'm not Isabella," she whispered, invoking the ghost that had haunted them both. "No," Salvatore said firmly. "Isabella was my past. I loved her, and I will always honor her. But she is gone. He lifted Clara's chin, so she had to look at him. His eyes, usually so cold, were burning with a fierce, terrifying devotion. "You are the woman who gave me back my life. You are the mother my son chose. And if you let me, I want you to be the future." "Salvatore, I'm not a good man, Clara. You know that. I have blood on my hands. I run an empire built on violence. I can't promise you a normal life, but I can promise you this. You will never be hungry again. You will never be cold again. And you will never ever be unsafe again. I will burn the world for you." Leo stirred between them, yawning. He opened his mismatched eyes and looked from Salvatore to Clara. "Papa," he mumbled, "are we home?" Salvatore looked at the boy, then back at the woman who had saved them both. "Yes, Leo," Salvatore said, his voice thick. "We are home." 6 months later. The Christmas gala at the Plaza Hotel was the event of the decade. The entire New York underworld, along with the politicians and judges on their payroll, were in attendance. The rumors had been swirling for months. The king is back, and he's not alone. The double doors to the ballroom opened. The chatter died instantly. The orchestra faltered. Salvatore Moretti entered. He looked sharper, deadlier, and more powerful than he had in years. The grey pallor of grief was gone. But no one was looking at him. On his left arm walked a woman who looked like a queen. Clara wore a gown of silver velvet that matched the vintage diamonds dripping from her neck. She walked with her head held high, her gaze steady. The fear was gone, replaced by the steel of a woman who knew exactly who she was and who stood beside her. And walking between them, holding both their hands, was a 5-year-old boy in a miniature tuxedo. A boy with one blue eye and one green eye. A collective gasp went through the room. The ghost. The heir. The miracle. Salvatore stopped in the center of the room. He didn't need a microphone. His presence filled the hall. "Gentlemen," Salvatore said, his voice carrying to the rafters. "Friends. Enemies." He looked down at Leo, then at Clara. He raised Clara's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a public declaration of submission and devotion that shocked the room. "Meet my son Leonardo Moretti, and my wife Clara Moretti." He looked up, his eyes scanning the crowd, challenging anyone to speak, to move, to breathe wrong. "The Moretti family is whole again," Salvatore declared, "and we are here to stay." As the room erupted into applause, some out of respect, most out of fear, Salvatore didn't watch the crowd. He looked at Clara. She squeezed his hand, a silent anchor in the storm. He had followed a poor maid into the rain, expecting to find a thief. Instead, he had found his heart. And as the music swelled, the King of New York realized he was finally truly free. And just like that, the man who thought his life was over found a new beginning in the most unlikely place. Salvatore Moretti learned that loyalty isn't just about bloodlines, it's about who stays when the world is burning. Clara didn't just save a boy, she saved a soul, from a freezing apartment in the Hollows to the throne of the New York underworld. Theirs is a love story, forged in fire and sealed with a secret that changed everything. What do you think? Would you have been able to forgive the uncle? Or did Salvatore let him off too easy? And if you were, Clara, would you have hidden the truth for that long? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a twist. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.